2, 1. Hi, my name is Lyric, and today we're going to be reacting to one of my favorite YouTubers ever. It is Wendigoon. He is one of the greatest YouTubers of all time. Like, his videos are just so interesting and so great, and we're finally going to be reacting to one because he just released a new one titled That Time Germans and Americans Fought Together in World War II, the Battle of Castle Itter. I actually know quite a bit about history in World War II, but I've never actually heard about this one. I know he's planning to make like an 8-hour video in World War II, which would be insane, and we definitely would react to that if that ever came up. But yeah, let's just get into it, man. 36 minutes long, and we're gonna be talking about it. I love his video style. It's one of my biggest inspirations. So yeah, if you like my reaction to this, make sure to pretend that you are the CIA, and the like button is Jonathan Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States, former President of the United States. Alright, also click subscribe, because I've been losing subscribers every time I upload a video, and it's really sad. Alright, let's begin.
Hello everybody, today we're going to talk about what is, in my opinion, the most overlooked battle of World War II, and that is the Battle of Castle Itter.
It probably is overlooked because I've never heard about it, and I know quite a bit about World War II.
And that is the Battle of Castle Itter. And you read the title right. This is a battle in which the Americans and Germans teamed up to save a group of French celebrities. Every aspect of this battle is wild, from the events that led up to the battle taking place, to the people involved, obviously, to even how it turned out in the end. Like, trust me, by the end of this thing, it's going to be so weird. You're going to love it. But to set the stage for how all of this came together, I need to explain some of the circumstances at the end of World War II that allowed an alliance like this to take place. So the end of World War II was a very weird time for the Germans. If you were a German in Berlin fighting the Russians, good luck. Because the Russian destruction of not only
the Russians did a lot of very heinous things to the Germans when they went into Germany.
The city of Berlin, but of the German High Command, kind of dismantled the entire army. Because of that, if you were a German soldier on the Western Front who was responsible with keeping the Americans and British at bay, then you kind of just had to figure it out. By the end of April, Hitler was already dead, and the only commands coming from up top were to just hold out. So as you could imagine, several of the Germans began to see the writing on the wall and realized the war was almost over. Now, your options for what you did going forward mostly depended on your position during the war. The two main distinctions, and for all of my World War II fanatics like myself, I realize that this is an oversimplification and that there were more factions, but for the sake of the video, this is all that's important. There were two main types of German soldiers, the Wehrmacht and the Waffen-SS. The Wehrmacht, and again I know I'm oversimplifying, was essentially the army. It was the primary composure of most of the fighting forces for Germany during World War II. Whereas the SS was a fighting force directly formed from the Nazi Party. Meaning not only were they a typically more elite force than the standard Wehrmacht troop, but during the war, they performed more of the party's objectives, like, you know, war crimes. So because of that, as the war was ending, the Wehrmacht had a pretty good chance if they just surrendered. Typically, during most modern wars, once the war's over, people who were just veterans of the other side...
What do you want? Sorry about that.
Aren't treated too harshly, as long as they were typically just military combatants. Now, things that the SS did are seen as a little less favorable to politics and history, like, you know, the Holocaust. So as the war in Europe was
just a bit less favorable, you know.
Ending in early May of 1945, several of the Wehrmacht troops began to surrender, while several of the SS dug in and were prepared to fight to the end. And it's within that setting of Wehrmacht and SS troops stationed on the northern border of Austria in the Tyrol region that our story takes place. What better place to begin our story than with the story of Castle Itter itself? And speaking of castles with weird towers, how about this tower? Do you know what this tower is? This tower is the phenomenal work that you guys have done on the Kickstarter. For those that don't know, I am making a movie with the writer and director
of the
SCP Overlord and SCP Dollhouse films. And you guys have been incredible.
I can't wait for that. I can't wait for that.
And have pushed this to a stupendous level.
That's insane.
And I cannot thank you enough. We still got a way to go. We're still not done. But it warms my heart to see me do something that I enjoy and that I'm passionate about, and you all to put so much faith and trust and money into it, like directly backing it, means the world in a way I could never fully explain, and thank you all for that. Like I said, we still got a way to go. I'm very excited for this. For those that don't know, I will link the video where I discuss the project in detail in the description, but it is going to be a horror action film set within the universe of the Stalker video game franchise. It's
Very good,
gonna
very
be cool,
good.
trust me. And we are currently running a
It sounds very
Kickstarter
cool.
for it that has all the information you can be into, as well as several cool rewards
Okay,
and
we're gonna.
benefits.
I'm sorry, my guy, but I'm gonna have to skip. I'm going to skip.
Watching me be scared, and hopefully
Going to skip. We have to go to the main video. Oh, we got an ad followed by an ad. Oh no, not Magic Spoon. I watched Drew Gooden try Magic Spoon. He said it wasn't good. God damn, how much Magic Spoon does this guy have though? Dear God, Wendigoon, bro. How much Magic Spoon do you need? Okay, let's get into it.
we are back to the video. We are going to go ahead and get into it, but as always, thank you for watching. Now, Castle Itter is an old landmark in the Austrian countryside. Its history dates back to at least the 13th century. But for the sake of our story, we're interested in its history during World War II. Whenever Germany took over Austria, they began to amass a lot of the land and landmarks for themselves. Now, Castle Itter was a desirable location not only because it looks cool, but also because a castle is a naturally good fortification. In the early years
Makes
of the war,
sense.
political leaders used it as a secret meeting location. However, in 1943, it became a part of the Dachau concentration camp. Now, several of you are probably familiar with the infamy of Dachau and several of the atrocities committed at the camp itself. But Dachau also had several properties in its proximity that it would use for transporting goods and weapons or stationing officers or what have you. So in 1943, it grabbed Castle Itter and began to use it as a prison for its important prisoners. And it had some very important prisoners. In the early years of its operation, it had the former Italian Prime Minister Francesco Nitti, as well as the former President of France, Albert Lebrun. And using a castle as a prison made a lot of sense. It only has one entrance, is heavily fortified on all sides, and is very easy to defend. And the prisoners who were put at Itter were kept in relatively good conditions. See, the Germans knew that it may be beneficial to have these former political leaders in good health, because in the future they could probably use them for leverage. Several of the prisoners who stayed there described the experience as being very bizarre. Because while yeah, they couldn't leave, they each had their own room, they had a free roam of the hallways, they could go out to the courtyard and exercise when they wanted.
It was
And
like
while the
house
guards
arrest.
would be rude if, they ever asked for anything too extraneous, most of the prisoners said the guards would try to be their friend. At the end of the war, several of the prisoners present included the sister of French free leader Charles Gaulle, two former French prime ministers, several French generals, and even French Olympic tennis athlete Jean Borotra. Again, all highly regarded individuals of France who Germany thought may be useful. One interesting detail is that apparently several of these people hated each other because a bunch of the politicians who were locked up were like far right and far left. And then you had several fighters and generals of the French army who were in there at the same time as politicians who were favorable of Germany at the beginning of the war. So apparently the German guards never had to
very
worry about
awkward.
them planning an escape because they could never get along with each other long enough to actually plan something. Now, as
That's
mentioned
great. That's a
earlier,
great plan.
Itter was
That's a great plan.
part of the Dachau concentration camp, and the concentration camps were staffed by SS members. Because of that, the head at Castle Itter was a man named Sebastian Weimer, a high-ranking officer in the SS. So, as the war was coming to a close, things got a lot more tumultuous at the castle. At the beginning, it started off slow. Like in 1945, the supply lines got low. So instead of lighting the castle with light bulbs that were ran by a generator, they had to begin using candles. Near the end of the war, the prisoners had a meeting with Weimar and essentially asked if things got really bad, if they were going to, be executed. And Weimar made the good
Fair
point
question.
that it would not be in his interest, as someone who's already going to get in a lot of trouble for being an SS officer, to execute a bunch of important people at the end of the war for no reason. And he said that if it came down to it, he would make sure they had a way out. Well, in late April, as the final weeks of the war were beginning, The castle became a checkpoint for SS officers who were trying to escape the Allies. Several of the officers who worked at the Dachau concentration camps would come to the castle and get their families and supplies together before making a run for it. Because again, like I mentioned in the beginning of the video, a lot of the SS did not have an option other than get out or fight. This culminated when on April 30th, Edward Wieder showed up to the castle. Edward Wieder is known as the Butcher of Dachau because he was the head of the Dachau concentration camp. And whenever he left for the castle at the end of April, he ordered the execution of the 2,000 remaining prisoners. April 30th was also the same day Hitler died. So whenever the Butcher massacred that many people on the same day that it was very apparent Germany was not going to win this thing, he took the third option and shot himself in the heart while he was in Castle Itter on May the 2nd. Which, funny side note, there is a village known as Village Itter at the base of Castle Itter, because the way it used to be set up in Europe is there'd be a big castle, then a village built next to it. So his men tried to bury him in the cemetery at Village Itter, and the priest of the town began to fight them and essentially say he doesn't want a murderer buried in his yard because duh. So they just buried him at an unmarked grave just outside the castle wall. It was at this point, after watching his boss commit Battlefield 5 exit lobby, that the head of Castle Itter, Weimar, decided to get out. So on May the 4th, Weimar begins to make a run for it. However, the prisoners protested, saying, hey, what happened to the whole "you're gonna let us go" thing? And Weimar says that he will make sure that they are guarded so that no danger befalls them. And all that Weimar did to ensure they were taken care of was, as he was making a run for it, he found an injured SS officer who had defected from the SS and asked him to put on his uniform and go protect the castle by himself. This SS officer, who to my understanding the name has been lost to history, had become injured in battle months prior and decided to leave the SS as he became disillusioned with it. So I guess he was just like, sure, I'll die protecting a bunch of French people, why not? Also, after Weimar left, all of the guards at the prison decided to leave as well. So by May the 4th, it was an entire castle of French prisoners and one not SS guard, and that was it. Now, the prisoners made the logical conclusion, considering that the SS soldiers in the area were desperate, that they weren't just going to leave a castle to itself. They would either storm in there and kill the French to take the castle as a defensive position, or just because they really don't have anything else going for them. So the French prisoners broke into the castle's armory that the Germans had just left intact, and they all began to arm themselves. Now, logically, they figured that they themselves were not going to be able to hold out against an entire SS regime. So they began to develop a plan in order to get some help. At this time, the Americans were moving across the Austrian countryside, securing each village one at a time. So naturally, the Americans would be on their way to secure Castle and Village Itter. So all they need to do is go find one of those American patrols and let them know that, hey, there's an empty castle. You should probably do something about that. Now, this part is a bit of a historical discrepancy. I've read a lot of sources on this story, and they seem to be kind of split on what exactly happened. Some say one of the prisoners tricked the guards on May the 3rd in order to sneak out, and then he went to go contact the Americans, and then someone else went on May the 4th. However, Stephen Harding, who wrote the book on this story titled The Last Battle, believes that it was just one individual who went to both groups. And since, he wrote the book, I'm going to go with his interpretation. So according to Harding, it was one Yugoslavian prisoner by the name of Andre. Despite being a Yugoslavian, he was transferred to the castle at the end of the war because the castle needed electrical work and Andre was an electrician. So on May the 4th, those who could speak English at the castle wrote out a message on a note that said something along the lines of, "Hi, I'm trapped in a castle and we're all gonna die, please help," and gave it to Andre so that whenever he runs into American forces, he could just show them that note, and hopefully they could put him in contact with someone who speaks German. So Andre hops on a motorcycle and begins to make his way to a nearby village known as Virgil. While on his way to Virgil, he was stopped by a group of Austrian freedom fighters on a house just outside of the village. Turns out there was a whole deployment of SS soldiers in Virgil, so it's good Andre didn't make it there. Andre explained to the freedom fighters, which was mostly composed of citizens of Austria who were fighting against the remnants of the German soldiers, that his objective was to make it to the Americans. The Austrians introduced them to their leader, the Wehrmacht Major, Joseph Gongol. Gongol was a very high-ranking German major. He had fought through the entirety of the war for the German army on the Eastern Front against the Russians, and then even at the Battle of Normandy against the Americans. However, as the war went on, he became disillusioned with the German sentiment, and at the tail end of it, defected and began leading the Austrian freedom fighters against the remaining Germans. Gongol's forces were composed of himself, about 20 Wehrmacht soldiers who followed him, along with the volunteering Austrian freedom fighters. So Andre comes to this German major and explains the whole story, that there's French VIPs in a castle, and they're probably going to get attacked by the SS. And Gongol says that he himself does not have the forces to help, but he bets the Americans do. So Gongol tells Andre to continue driving in one direction until he hits the Americans in a town about 20 miles away, while Gongol himself, along with his Wehrmacht soldiers, will go the other direction to where he thinks the Americans may be. So these two, a German major with a truckload of German soldiers, as well as a Yugoslavian prisoner who doesn't speak English, both set off to find American help.
This is, okay, we got an ad, but this is very interesting. Just these stories that he's able to tell, and, these interesting stories, like, I don't know how I've never heard about this one.
On Andre's
before. You think this would be just a fact that I would learn when learning about World War II? It was like, oh, it's a fun fact. You know, the Germans and Americans fought together in one battle about this castle were protecting a bunch of French people.
Side, he eventually
but I've never heard about
makes
this.
it to an American deployment and hands them a letter, gets a translator, and explains everything. So they begin to travel with Andre back to the castle with a deployment of 4 tank destroyers and an infantry transport and jeeps and everything needed. However, on their way to the castle, they ran into a group of Austrian freedom fighters who were in a fight with German soldiers, and the convoy began taking artillery fire, so they had to stop. Meanwhile, Gongol made it to the nearby village of Kufstein, I'm horrible with names. Gongol, driving his Kuppenwagen, which looks like this, was riding with a giant white
I love the German way of saying a lot of words.
Flag hanging out the side of it. And whenever he made contact with the American tank division that was there, he got out and walked towards them holding the flag with his hands up, and was taken to the head of the 23rd Tank Battalion. Gongol explained the story, and the battalion asked for any volunteers. The volunteer who stepped up was First Lieutenant John C. Jack Lee Jr., which not only is one of the most American names ever, but for the duration of this video, I want you to imagine him as Lieutenant Aldo Raines from Inglourious Bastards, because that's exactly who this guy was. Despite joining the Army from New York, he was originally from Nebraska. And despite being only 27, he had commanded his N4 Sherman tank through France, Germany, and now Austria.
Oh, wow.
As a matter of fact, the day previously, on May the 3rd, he was part of the battle that cleared the Kufstein village. So this guy is at the tail end of the war. He just fought the day before, but he decides to go fight to rescue a bunch of French prisoners. Whenever he signed up, his friend, who was also a tank commander, Lieutenant Harry Bass, also volunteered to go along with him. So between the tanks and crew, at this point, it was 2 tanks and 8 volunteers. On top of that, 6 volunteers from the All-African American Company D of the 17th Armored Infantry Battalion rode on top. Whenever they left, the battalion also sent 5 more tanks with them for fire support. So this group of American tanks and German soldiers began to make their way back to Castle Itter. They got to the city of Virgil, as mentioned earlier, that was full of SS soldiers. However, when they get there, they find that the SS had just left. Afraid that the SS may try to retake the town, Lee leaves the 5 support tanks that had followed them at the town to defend it. About 4 miles from Castle Itter, they pass the only bridge to the castle that had been wired to blow by the SS who had just left. Gongol soldiers, who know how to work German explosives, defuse the bomb, and after they cross the bridge, Lee leaves the other tank there in order to defend it. Because since that bridge is the only way Germans could get armor up to the castle, it's a good idea to make sure that doesn't happen. However, Henry Bass, who's Lee's friend, refuses to get left behind on the action while Lee goes to the castle, so he leaves someone else in charge of his tank while he hops on Lee's tank and goes with him. So at this point, the group that's making their way to the castle is composed of one tank, 7 Americans in total, and Gongol and his 20 German soldiers. As they're making their way up to the castle, they round a turn and come across...
I just realized in the background, he's got a new album cover in the background now. He's replaced the Astro World. He replaced the Astro World a long time ago, but he didn't have another album cover there for a while.
It's a group of SS soldiers who are trying to set up a roadblock. They begin to shoot at the Germans on the road, to which Lee then tells the driver to gun it, and they all run up the road and make their way to the castle. And that roadblock was evidence that the SS were probably going to try to take the castle. Whenever they arrive, the French VIPs are not exactly thrilled, because think about it, they're afraid of a German attack, so they send Andre to go get help. And then the people who come back is 7 Americans,
and they're in
one
the Germans.
Tank, 20 Germans, no way to get them out of the castle, and no Andre. Like I said, Stephen Harding is my primary source for this story, not only because I believe he's the most accurate, but also because he includes the funniest details. One of them being the French prime ministers who were at the castle said that Gongol, the German major, was very polite and kind, whereas Lee was, quote, crude in both looks and manners. Once they get to the castle, Lee has his tank placed in the entryway. So
you did not have to put that down. You don't have to put that down.
Anyone walking in. And after they get there, they get some food together for all the men that are present. And then apparently cracked open the wine cellar and started just having a party. Think about it. You have a bunch of French celebrities, a bunch of German foot soldiers, a variety of American soldiers.
This seems like the beginning to a joke, like a bunch of French celebrities, German soldiers, and American soldiers walk into a bar.
And they're all just having...
You can finish that joke.
...drinks and partying in a castle that's about to be invaded. That night, Lee, Bass, Gongol, and the aforementioned SS officer who was guarding the castle all went out and began to set up defensive positions if the SS were to attack. I would kill to have known what they talked about. 2 American tank commanders, a Wehrmacht major, and an SS officer all planning together. One of history's most...
I'm telling you, bro, it's the beginning to a joke.
...bizarre moments. I wonder if any of them, took a moment to realize just the absurdity of it. Lee certainly took the reins on the operation, and he recognized that they did not have the power to transport the prisoners out of the castle. So instead, Lee's reasoning was, for one, Andre is still out there hopefully getting help. Because if you remember, at this time, Andre got himself...
They should make a historically accurate comedic movie about this, kind of like The Death of Stalin, which is, surprisingly very historically accurate, but also very funny.
...into another gunfight and wasn't able to make his way to the castle yet. And 2... the Americans are continuing to take each village one at a time, and hopefully the front line would be here soon. So in the meantime, they were going to wait there until help arrived. And sure enough, it's good they planned the defense when they did, because at 11 o'clock that night, a group of SS soldiers attacked. They opened up with machine gun fire and began hitting the top of the castle wall. The defenders inside began to fire back. It was too dark to see anyone, and the entire battle was determined by tracer fire going back and forth in both directions. Slow gunfire continued all night long, with just enough contact being sustained to keep either side from pushing their luck. That was until dawn struck and people could actually see what they were shooting at. As soon as the SS could see, they began to fire an 88mm that they had stashed in the hillside the night prior. The first hit ripped through the castle wall, destroying a bunch of the rooms inside, before the 88 turned its attention on Lee's tank. The shot ripped...
It's weird hearing about just... not even talking about everything, all the craziness happening in the story. It's weird just hearing a battle in World War II that takes place at a castle. It just seems so medieval to have a battle at a castle. But just World War II, just having a battle of people just shooting down a castle.
through the tank, nearly killing the radio operator who was inside, and he just managed to get out before the fuel tank ignited and the tank blew up. So, while still blocking the main entryway, the tank was no longer usable. So because of that, the SS began to make their way to the east and west walls of the castle and tried to breach entry. As the gunfire began to heat up, Lee ordered the French prisoners back into the castle walls to protect themselves. However, they refused to leave and joined in on the fight. The SS soldiers on the ground began to throw grappling hooks up on the wall to try to climb over the castle wall that way, and the defenders on the walls would shoot down at them whenever they tried to climb. This went on for several hours, and I just want you to picture the image of Americans, Germans, and French all fighting together inside of the castle against other advancing Germans. Several of their French made their way to the top of the castle and began using the bolt-action rifles to pick off soldiers up in the tree line. Lee and Gongol went to the top of the castle wall and began to scope out machine gun positions. They were also trying to locate the 88mm, which had been very well hidden. A few of the defenders had been hit, although it wasn't enough on its own to risk defeat. And while I'm not exactly sure how it happened, some reports say that as he was trying to help one of the French prisoners inside of the castle, or while he was looking for the 88mm, Major Gongol was killed by sniper fire. The defenders continued to hold strong, however they were running out of ammunition and wouldn't be able to last for long. Now you may be thinking at this time, where is Andre at? Because that guy has spent like a day just hiding in the trees. Well, around this time at about noon on May the 5th, Andre and his group, led by Major John Kramers, had reached the village of Virgil and the bridge that Bass's tank was guarding. Kramers couldn't get into contact with Lee because, as mentioned, the radio in the tank was destroyed when, the tank blew up. So Kramers was trying to find a way to get in contact with Lee up at the castle to see how bad the situation was. And one of the Austrians said, "Have you tried calling him?" Because there was a phone line ran from the Virgil town hall to the castle. So Kramers calls the castle, and then in the middle of the shootout...
Calls the castle just seems so wrong.
One of the French pick up the phone.
As in, like, it doesn't seem like it fits, like a thing you could possibly do.
And then, I assume, by yelling, "It's for you," to Lee, Lee comes to the phone and begins to describe the situation to Kramer.
I'm just imagining middle of a war in a castle with guns shooting at them. Just a phone call in a castle, just picking it up. "It's for you! Hey! It's for you!"
Like... You're in a gunfight in a derelict castle, and the phone starts ringing, and someone's like, "Oh, I better get that."
You're just in the middle of a battle, and just your grandma just calls you, "Hey, hey, I'm in the middle of a war right now. I can't really talk. Sorry."
So Lee explains, "I need help, like now." And Kramers and his group begins to rush their way up to the castle. At this point, the defenders didn't have a lot of time left. The SS kept getting closer in the tree line. And apparently the road to get to the castle was very confusing. There was a ton of different turns through the village and different ways to drive through the forest. So Jean Borotra, the Olympic tennis athlete that I mentioned earlier,
not the
who
Olympic
was
tennis
familiar
athlete.
with the village, asked Lee if he could make a run for it to guide the tanks up the hillside. Lee tells him to do it, with the understanding that he may die. And as soon as a lull in gunfire hits, Jean vaults over the castle wall and then runs through the woods by several emplacements of SS soldiers and lives. I have absolutely no idea how that guy didn't die. For further comedic effect, you could do what I do and imagine him in like an Adidas tracksuit. So this guy...
I was imagining him in like it's an Adidas... Dude, I'm telling you, this would make a great comedic movie. But it would also be historically accurate. Of him just running through bullets, just happening to not be hit, and just going into the forest.
Sprints several miles down the hillside, finds the tank crew, and begins guiding them up the road to the castle. Meanwhile, in the castle, Lee is preparing for the worst case scenario, and as people are running out of ammo, he's ordering them to go into the castle and wait with knives. And when asked about it later, he said his plan was, if they ran out of ammo, they were each going to either get knives or just be ready to fight with their fist in like strategically placed positions throughout the castle's keep. Because, hey, I mean, that's what they were designed for in the first place, right? So might as well get medieval. So at around 3
Oh, full. Yeah, you might as well get a sword at this point. To just fight them
p.m.,
with.
almost everyone's out of ammo, and there's a bunch of very scared French and Germans inside of the castle ready to punch someone to death. The SS had made their way to the front gate and were about...
Imagine you're in a war. You're trying to overtake this castle. You go into the castle. You're out of ammo. You're ready to go. And then you just get punched straight in the head by 20 random French celebrities and Germans and Americans. How confused you must be in that scenario of how your life ended up to this point.
about to storm into the courtyard of the castle itself when they were stopped by machine gun and tank fire from the now arriving American tanks. Kramer's group had just made it up the hill and began shooting at the SS that were making their way to the front, and whenever they began to fire, the SS retreated. One of the few remaining Wehrmacht soldiers, who was still stationed at the top of the castle, began to scream in joy, Amerikanische Panzer, which is German for American tank, which it's so wild. Again, I know I keep emphasizing the weirdness of the situation, but how can I not? A German soldier yelling American tank as if it's a good thing, when throughout the rest of the war it was a very bad thing.
I think
I love these scenarios that he
reasons-
explains. They're just, I mean, it's a tragic event. People have died, but it's just so
That
funny.
The small details of this event are
Just the
remembered so well
ridiculousness.
is because in Kramer's group was a journalist who immediately began interviewing everyone and getting their take on what happened. And the journalist talked about the bizarre nature of coming into a medieval castle and seeing French, German, white and black Americans all gathered together.
We got the whole
behind
squad.
A burning tank.
We got the whole
shooting
squad
at
here.
Other Germans. So as everyone was cheering and happy, Lee walked out of the castle with a blank expression and walked up to the officers who were standing next to Lee's burning tank. And without saying anything else, he just looked them in the eye and said, "So, what kept you?" And then they all broke out into laughter over the humor of almost dying. So there at the castle, the wounded were treated, and the French, who had been there for far too long at this point, were immediately evacuated away. Everyone was given awards. I imagine the Wehrmacht were treated a little bit better than the other Wehrmacht after the surrender. Lee was given a Distinguished Service Cross medal, a Silver Star, and even promoted to captain. Now, the only official death that took place on the Defenders' side was that of Major Gongol. Most reports list that he was the only one dead, and there was like 4 or 5 wounded. But I think what it actually was is that the Wehrmacht soldiers who were fighting alongside the Americans and French, there was no official record of them, at least on any capacity in the Ally side. So I think they just don't exist historically. But I think some of them did die. Because in a lot of the reports, there's mentions of them clearing the bodies, as in bodies, plural, not just Gongol. So whenever you read about this story, and it's like, yeah, there was 1 dead and a few more injured, I think that's 1 person who history cares about dead, and then some defected Germans who no one really kept track of. But either way, it seems that there were no casualties on the French or American factions. And again, the only official death on the Defenders' part recorded that day was that of Major Gongol, and an unspecified number of SS troops who were killed on the offensive side. According to Stephen Harding, decades later, shortly before Lee passed away, he was asked about the Battle of Castle Itter and what he thought of it. And after thinking about the question, Lee sat there in silence for a while and then said, "Well, it was just the damnedest thing." And that is the story of one of the most underrated battles in the entirety of American warfare. And I, for one, am personally offended that it's not only talked about more, but also, why isn't there like a movie about this thing? They will make a movie out of every 2-sentence paragraph in history that's like, this group of people defended this location. But here's a story of like the weirdest team up ever defending a medieval castle in a gunfight that lasted for over 12 hours.
What have I been saying?
You've got Olympic athletes vaulting over hillsides and running through German lines, and you've
It'd be a
got
great
these
movie.
German snipers
I'll
shooting
make the
at
damn movie.
German majors, and then these French prisoners. Like, you can do so much with this. I am bothered. I will be having my people, in other words, me and Kayla, in contact with Quentin Tarantino's legal team tonight, if I have to. This is a fantastic
Everyone
story,
email him.
and I think it's one that deserves to be told, which is why I wanted to tell it. And
It's a great
hopefully,
story.
if you stuck around this long, you think
have.
it's interesting as well. And
I
that's
do
cool,
think it's
'cause
very
I do
interesting.
too, and I just want to say thank you for watching. I
You're
didn't
welcome,
know
man. You're
about
welcome.
this story until recently. I was doing research for, again, the mega ultra World War II video I keep hyping up that I'm
reacting to that.
overhype.
100%.
And I was looking at stories of like defectors and spies, and there was like a parentheses at the end of a sentence that said something to the effect of, "This is in contrast to when the Germans and Americans fought side by side at the Battle of Castle Itter." And I was just like, the what? Like, I found this off a rabbit hole. It reminds me of
It's great.
what the Akali raft video I did about I called it like the not safe for work raft or whatever, like that whole story that came to me whenever I was researching like disturbing human experiments, and then that was one of them, and a parenthesis said, although the authority of this story has been debated. Like, I find out about the weirdest topics through footnotes. And I love it. I love doing this. I love this job.
This
Love
is
that I
great.
can envelop myself in research and then just chase these rabbit trails that become videos. And you guys are so fantastic for allowing me that, and it means a lot. We're at 1.67. Yeah, I think.
Alright, I think that's pretty much the end of this video. That was a great video by Wendigoon. That was a great story. If you want me to react to Wendigoon, please request more, because I love Wendigoon. He's so great. One of my favorite YouTubers all time. He tells amazing stories, very educational, but also very funny. With like how he explains the stories, and very educational. I love his editing style sometimes. Of just very little editing of him just talking to you. It feels very much more real, and it feels like someone's just explaining to a story to me, which I really like. Same thing with Mr. Ballin and stuff. Yeah, that's the end of this video. Make sure, if you like this video, make sure to pretend that you are the CIA, and the like button is Jonathan Fitzgerald Kennedy, former president of the United States of America. And also, click the subscribe button, because I am losing subscribers every time I upload, and it makes me sad. Bye.